Good morning. I'm going to talk a little bit before why I'm getting ready for work this morning. Today is January 4th, and I got up thinking about where was I and what was I doing 32 years ago today. And most people would say, I don't have any idea. I've slept some since then. A lot of water under the bridge since then. But it's funny how trauma and grief can keep memories alive. 32 years ago today, January 4th, probably was the most bittersweet moment of my whole life. We had just been married less than a year. I had just turned 19 8 days prior. I was 7 months pregnant with our first child. We were going along, but prenatal care wasn't as huge as it is today. As far as, I went to my monthly checkups, but they didn't do like the extensive ultrasounds and sonograms and those things like they do now. And we had no reason to think that there was anything going on, so we just went along with the pregnancy. Well, about 7 months, 7 months in, my body started becoming explosively large. Huge. Like to the point where I was so miserable and uncomfortable that it hurt. Everything hurt. I couldn't sit, couldn't stand, couldn't breathe, couldn't sleep. It just, because everything was so compressed and so compacted underneath my ribs, and it was just, I just thought it was normal. I'd never been pregnant. I didn't know. I thought it was supposed to be that miserable. I just didn't know. So we went along, with it. I just kept thinking, well, it's part of it. And I can remember somewhere around January, like New Year's Day, New Year's Eve, thinking I was having a little bit of pain, but not, by that time I was miserable. I was so miserable at that time. Anything that might have resembled labor to me was just another pain. Just didn't think about it, whatever. So I can remember thinking, this doesn't feel quite right, but I just don't want to. It was I can remember it being a Sunday and me thinking, I don't want to bother the doctor today. That's his day that he's home. I assumed, Sunday was a day of family and rest and all that. And that was my mind. I didn't want to bother him. So, and I thought this is not hurting me that bad to where I think it could have been labor. That was probably my thoughts, because I thought this should be hurting worse. So anyway, I think that went on for about 24 hours. And I was still having some pain, little. So we went in, and lo and behold, Dr. Stafford, I'll never forget him. He met us at the doctor's office. And first thing he said to me, because he checked me, and I was starting to dilate a little bit. He looked at me and he said, "You have a huge baby in here." And I was only 7 months pregnant. And I was like, okay. But I was so big that I don't think my stomach would have gotten any bigger. Well, he did an ultrasound, and lo and behold, we had a baby with a blockage in her intestines. And this was the reason why I was getting so large, because what was happening was she was swallowing the fluid, which babies do, and it's supposed to be, expelled out as waste with the baby. That's a natural way things naturally happen. And that amniotic fluid is reproducing itself all the time to stay around the baby. Well, what she was doing, because the babies will swallow it and it'll come out as waste, okay? Just God's beautiful plan on how things work while you're pregnant. I don't understand exactly the mechanics of it, but that's how they explained it to me. So, anyway, she was regurgitating this fluid back into my tummy. And because of that, I was just getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, because there's only so much you can hold before your body just says, okay, I can't do no more, you know. And I was getting to that point. So what's the natural way your body reacts to that? Your body reacts to it by saying, okay, we're going to have a baby. We're getting rid of whatever this is that's causing this problem. So I was starting to have labor pains. And anyway, so he said, you know, being that she was going to be 2 months, you know, be premature, and due to the complication that she had, which that's the only thing that I guess that's probably the only thing he had looked for that day, and that was what he knew the problem was. So he said, you know, if you go to deliver, you'll go to Indy. So I'm like, okay. So in the meantime, they admitted me to the hospital. No, wait a minute. They sent me home on bed rest, I think is what they did. Anyway, I didn't go to the hospital right away. They sent me home on bed rest, and it was like, you know, just because I was having these pains, and they were like, okay, we just need to try to stop this as much as we can and just go home and rest. Well, that didn't work. So, anyway, we got admitted to the hospital, and they started me on a morphine drip, because morphine will supposedly stop or slow things down. And so, of course, I'm in the hospital bed, and I had contracted an infection because of all the fluid. My body was just over it, you know. My body was just like, I can't do this no more. This is a foreign substance to me. At this point, it was trying to expel what was making me sick, which that's what your body, in that case, tries to do. Your body is like, okay, we see this as a foreign invader, and that we need to get it out. So, and of course, you know, me being 7 months pregnant, they didn't want me going into early labor. So Dr. Stafford had, in the meantime, took some of the amniotic fluid out by a needle, which involved me laying on the table, flat on my back, while I had about a 20-pound brick basically on my tummy, pressing on my spine, and in back labor. And if you've ever had to lay flat on a table and your back's hurting you and you can't move because they have a needle in your tummy and you're trying to pull fluid out and they don't want to hit the baby with the needle and you can't move, it hurts. And I remember that because I couldn't move, and of course the ultrasound tech was an old man, and so he was just like, you're gonna have to hold still. And I was like, at that point, never opened my mouth to say any cruel thing or mean thing to anybody, but that was in that moment I wanted to punch him right in the throat, because I literally, after probably about 20 minutes, I was in so much pain I couldn't take it, and I was just crying. And Dr. Stafford was so sweet, and he was like, we're gonna have to stop because she's up, you know, visibly this is hurting her. So anyway, I guess they pulled about a pint, maybe a pint or more of fluid out of my tummy, which relieved me for a moment because it took that pressure of all that fluid. I mean, I was big all the way up underneath my diaphragm. My tummy expanded. I was huge. Basically, all my organs were pushed up underneath my ribs in probably about a 2-inch spot. My ribs, my tummy, all that, because of all the fluid I had. So I was very uncomfortable, to say the least. So I can remember them taking me back to the bed in my room and me just feeling such a sense of relief that I could actually breathe, and that I can remember falling asleep and feeling like somebody was standing there looking at me, and I woke up And Dr. Stafford was standing there, and I think he was afraid to wake me up, but he was so nice, so compassionate, and he was trying to talk to me, and tell me that, this is just a temporary fix, and we're gonna, keep you and, monitor you here, and if we can keep you from going into labor, we will, but if not, because this fluid is just gonna replenish itself within a, few hours or whatever, and it did. But, he said, if we go to have a baby, you're gonna go to Indy. Because of the blockage, they knew that they wanted to have her close to Riley, and that they wanted to make sure she was close enough so they could take her to surgery to fix the blockage. Because at that time, that's all they thought was wrong. And of course, she was going to be a preemie 2 months early, and so they wanted her to be at the best place she could be, which is Riley Children's Hospital. So I was like, okay. And mind you, I had never had a baby. Nothing had prepared me for any of this. We thought we still had time. I hadn't had a shower. We lived in a little one-bedroom apartment. We didn't have a nursery, which at the end of it all was probably a blessing. But, we were just not prepared to have a baby in the traditional sense of, having a baby, a healthy baby, bringing it home and having all the things that you need. So anyway, they stuck me at Bloomington Hospital, and it was cold. Like, it had snowed, and there was ice on the road, and I'm talking, it was probably wind chills down into the negative digits. And it was just cold out. And I remember they had me hooked up to all the monitors, and excuse me, all the monitors were on me, and of course they didn't want me up moving around, any more than I had to. So I had to stay on the bed to go to the bathroom, so they would bring a bedpan in. And if you've got all that pressure and weight pushing on your tummy and on your bladder, you're going to have to go pee quite a bit, especially when they're pumping fluid in you, okay? And the night before, I had run a fever of like 102, and it was just my body's way of, because there was that old infection, my body was just saying, it's time. Get this out. Get this, whatever this is making you sick, get it out. And so they had me strapped down to the bed because I wasn't allowed to get up and walk or anything like that. So going on the bedpan, my nurse was just not real happy with me because I would have to have her come in there about, it just seemed like every hour on the hour I had to go pee. So, but you can't help it. That's just the way it is. You can't help it. So, yeah, so I'd been up probably most of the night because I just wasn't, you just can't sleep when you're that uncomfortable. You just can't. So I didn't sleep most of the night. And my nurse was perturbed with me because she just had to keep coming in and helping me get on the bedpan. And I had done that so many times that my elbows had rug burns on them because I had to hoist myself up, on the bed and get up on that bedpan. But anyway, so, and I just wasn't saying a whole lot. I knew I was having a little bit of pain, but it wasn't, like I said, it wasn't enough for me to be startled by it, and I was at that point, I was miserable anyway, because, you get to that point, you think, oh, it's just another pain. But anyway, Dr. Crook come in that morning and was making his rounds, and I hadn't had a doctor checking on me through the night. It was just my nurse. And so he come in and he checked me, and I'm telling you what, we hit the ground running. I was dilated to 5. I had done that just in a matter of a couple of hours throughout the night and hadn't had anybody checking me. So they went into like, hustle, let's do this. We got to get her up to Indy. So they got me strapped down to a gurney and got me in the ambulance with a couple nurses, and I wasn't allowed to have my husband with me. And so he had to drive with my mom and stepdad. And anybody that knows that part of the story knows that that's a hot mess. My stepdad's a hot mess anyway. I mean, the conditions of the road were horrible. There was ice and stuff all over the road, and it was just so bad. And so I was obviously scared. You know, here I'm getting ready to have a baby in a strange place that I had never been, with people I had never met. And I was by myself with these two nurses, and I'm laying in there on that gurney, and I can remember they're talking amongst each other, and I was strapped to my right side, and I can remember having back pain. And I just told my nurse, can you please rub my back? And I was just so afraid to say anything. But I was having back labor. Found out later that was what it was. Because when I got there, I was dilated to 9. In 30 minutes that it took me in the ambulance to get to Indy, because they hustled. Even though the roads were bad, they got me there quickly. In about 30 minutes, I had dilated from 5 centimeters to 9 centimeters. And walked in there, and of course they're rushing around trying to get me prepped to go into the labor room. And so I'm in this place, don't know these people, I've never met these nurses, these doctors, nobody. You talk about scared. I was just scared and tired and sick, and I just didn't feel well. It just was a lot of things going on at one time that I just wasn't prepared for. And so I was beginning to think, hey, that, you know, they're not going to get there on time. I'm going to have to do this. I'm going to have to go in and have this baby by myself. And, you know, I was just scared. And so about that time, Mike got there, and they took me back, and they wanted me to be, I guess, in a sterile environment. So they took me, even though it was a natural birth, they took me into like a sterile area. So they prepped me, and long and behold, you know, it wasn't long after that she was born. And I can remember them taking her. Of course, they take them right away when they're that little and they're that premature, and they know that there's stuff wrong with them, that they're going to take them away as soon as possible, because more than likely they're going to have trouble breathing, and they're just not going to be able to sit on your lap like a healthy child will. And I remember them being, you know, she was whisked away, and all I can remember is seeing all her thick black head of hair. And I can do this without crying, y'all. I'm gonna try to do this without crying. So I can remember them taking her away and seeing her black hair. And of course, I'm on the table. My legs are up in the stirrups, and they're trying to sew me up and do all the things that, you know, they needed to do to get me whatever, you know. And I can remember you know, I don't know how long it had been. It didn't seem like it had been a very long time had gone by. And a nurse came in, and I'm still laying there on the table, and she says, just nonchalantly, like it was something that they, you know, seen all the time, like it was just something that they dealt with every day. She says, well, we just want you to know that your baby's heart is on her right side. Excuse me? Because, I mean, you're sitting there processing it like, wait a minute. That's not normal. You have to think about what side your heart's really on. Your heart's on your left side. And I was like, oh, okay. Like, what do you want me to do with this information? Like, it was like somebody knocked you in the head with a hammer. You know, it's like shock and like, wait, what? Like, nobody told me to prepare for this. You know, nobody told me anything about I was so naive and so green, and I had not been taught any of life's lessons about babies or pregnancy. I just knew that it was something that I could have and love and it would love me back. And I didn't know what else it was going to happen, but I just knew that, you know, that's what I wanted. And nobody told me that, hey, you could end up having a sick child. You could end up having one that's got issues. You know, nobody prepared me for that. We had not even, nothing had prepared me for that. So we were in there, and they kept me at the hospital for 4 days. Even though I was just in a natural delivery, I had all that infection. And so they wanted me to, I think they probably wanted to keep me just for that reason. And of course, we were up there, and in the hospital, where I delivered and the Riley are all connected underground. I don't know if people know that, that's never been there, but they have tunnels that go underground, and you can walk them without having to get out in the elements. They're heated, you know, so you don't have to go out in the cold or the whatever. So anyway, they wanted us close by, and so we were there. And the first 4 nights, you know, was rough. The weather was being so bad and stuff. So they dismissed me and released me. And I remember the first night we laid in the waiting room of Riley Children's Hospital, and the little love seat that I slept on was not really a love seat. It was kind of like 2 chairs that they had fused together. You talk about uncomfortable. And my body was telling me, you got a baby. I was expelling, and I'm not trying to be gross, but just real. My body was expelling all kinds of stuff because I had infection. I had a baby. So I was trying to deal with that. My milk was coming in, and I was trying to pump, because my hopes were, my long-term goal was to have enough milk saved so when she could start eating, that she could have my milk, you know. So I was pumping, trying to keep that going. It was a lot to take in. And it seemed like every time we would go in, there would be something more that they would find out, something more that they would tell us that happened. So they did it. They did the surgery on her intestine, and that went well. But the other things that were going on in her body, which come to find out that there was a syndrome that she had, and it was called polysplenial syndrome. And it causes everything in your body to be like a mirrored effect. Like, let's say if you put your mirror up to your chest, everything's going to be opposite. So that's why her heart was over here. You know, both lungs tend to be real similar, kidneys, lung, you know. So basically, it just turns, something in the genetic code got switched around, and it just malfunctioned. She had all her organs, but they were just, some of them were not in the right place. And another thing that caused the problems, which was reason why she had to go into an early surgery for her heart, was because she had a smaller aorta than she should have had. And so it was blocking adequate blood flow to her lower organs, like her liver. So thus her liver was beginning to fail and causing her to swell excessively, and so her head and her face. So it was just causing a trickle-down effect. And they didn't want to do a surgery on her heart at that age. They would have rather waited, but because of all the issues that she was having with everything else, they couldn't wait. So we were put up the night before at Ronald McDonald's house. They gave us a room, and they do that because it was something they wanted us to be there for. The surgery was the next day. So we were laying in bed that night, and I was brought up in a Baptist church, but the Baptist church I was brought up in, you might as well went into the meat locker at your local restaurant and sit there, because that's all I got from it. It was never a place where I was taught how to get a hold of God. I was never taught how to pray. I was never taught the adequate word to release. It was just one of those things I felt obligated to do as a teenager. I went, but not all the time. But I never learned. Let's just say that. I never learned anything. So at that point, I did not understand how to access God. I did not understand how to talk to him. Didn't understand that I really could talk to him. But I can remember we laid in bed that night, Mike and I did, and I can remember him, asking, asking me if we could pray together, and we did. And it was just a very simple prayer together. But then I remember praying in my mind, thinking, and it wasn't, like I said, it wasn't a prayer that was audible. It was just in my mind. I was talking to God. And simply, I said to him, I know you can do anything. Even then, I had faith to believe he could do anything he wanted to. He was sovereign. He can put up and he can tear down, and he can heal, he can deliver, he can do whatever he pleases because he's God. I remember saying to him in my mind that night when I was going to sleep, I was like, God, you know what, God, if you... And I know who I am as a person, and I know people will harshly judge me for being this way because, that some people would see it as selfish. But I simply said to him, I know you're able to do anything. I know you can heal, you can make, you can do whatever you please. And I simply asked him, Lord, if you choose not to heal her, please take her. And moms across America probably right now are like, what? You prayed that God would take your baby? It's not that simple. Yes, I did. Because, number one, I knew I could not go through all that, taking home a sick child, having to be a nurse, caregiver, because it would have killed me. Like, being responsible like that would have been so much weight on me, I would have broken under the pressure. And I didn't want to take a sick child home only to be taken from me later on in life. It's easier to let go of something you've not ever got attached to. I mean, I was attached to her because I held her and carried her, but they only allowed us to hold her one time while she was alive. So when I say attached, I mean, taking home a baby. Like, for instance, I knew had I taken a healthy child home, and let's say that they died of SIDS or whatever, or in a car accident, how much harder would that be? Even though death is death, but it's like your attachment level kind of gives you an understanding of what your level of grief is going to be. And I knew I couldn't I couldn't go through all those weeks and months in the hospital to take a sick child home with stipulations of her health and then possibly lose her later on. That would kill me. So basically, I just said that very simple prayer to God and said, look, I know you're able to heal. You can do anything you want. But if you choose not to, would you please take her? And that was it. That's all I had said. I didn't have eloquent words. I didn't have, I didn't have all that church vernacular. I didn't. I just said what I had to say and how I wanted to say it, and I knew he understood it, and he heard me. So we got up and went over to the hospital the next day. And I can remember them, telling us that it was going to be, there's a risk here, because anytime you're doing a heart surgery on anybody, there's a risk. But for an infant who is a preemie, who is sickly in so many other ways, their heart just can't, they're not strong enough, they're not strong enough. And it was something I had it's like the Lord prepared me mentally. Even though I was worried and sad and grieved, it was almost like I had a peace at the same time. Does that make sense? I had a peace. And so I remember we were sitting in the waiting room, and of course, you know, my mom was there, Steve was there. I'm thinking probably my husband's parents were there. I don't remember that part. And we were sitting there, and they told us it would be several hours, you know, a couple, 3 hours for the procedure if it all went as planned. So we knew we were going to be sitting there for a little bit. Oh, Brother Underwood was there. So we knew we were going to be sitting there for a while. And so at one point, the nurse came and said, you know, we're, the doctors are having to massage her heart because it, you know, it's out of rhythm and things like that. And so we're like, okay, you know, I mean, I don't know what that means. At that point, I didn't know what that meant. I thought, you know, I mean, that's their job, is to come and tell us what's going on. I get that. So she come by and told us that, and it didn't seem like it was that much longer after that. I can remember we were sitting in the waiting area, excuse me, and the walk down the hall, pardon me, was where we were sitting. You basically came out of the waiting area, and you could look down the hall and see the doors to the where they went in to take her to surgery. So we weren't that, you know, far away. And so I can remember walking into the hall and looking down at those doors. And everybody else was inside there sitting in the waiting area, and I was kind of pacing the floor as you would. And I think it was just God's timing that took me into the hallway that day and made me look, because about that time, I seen the doctors, same doctors and the surgeons that had took her back were coming back through those doors. And I remember thinking to myself, it's not been enough time. And right then I knew what they were fixing to tell me, because simple deduction, it's not been enough time, and they have not been able to adequately have enough time to fix the problem, and they're going to come and tell me she's died. And I knew in my heart that was what they were coming to tell me. And I can remember just getting myself up against the wall and bracing myself, and I just backed up against the wall and slid down and sat down on the floor. And it was just like I was preparing to brace for what they were getting ready to tell me. I knew what I was going to get ready to hear, but I think at the time I didn't think my feet were going to take it. I didn't know, I knew what I was fixing to hear, and at the same time I was relieved, but at the same time I couldn't stand to and hear it. And so they brought her, you know, they told us what had happened and that she had passed, and they told us that we could hold her, they was going to bring her to us in a room, and we could hold her and sit with her as long as we wanted to. And to this day, I don't know why they brought her the way that they brought her. They brought her still with the surgical tube in her nose. They didn't clean her up. And I sat with her. And this is the day that if I could go back and I could change this part of that day, well, of course I wouldn't. I'd change everything as far as her dying. But if I didn't have control over any of that, but I could control this part, this is the part I could control, I would have not had that man in that room with me, the pastor. Because later on I found out that he was perpetrating adultery, which is neither here nor there, but he's the man that sat there in that room that day and told me to put my baby back. Said it was time to put her back, and I didn't want to, because they had already said you could sit with her as long as you wanted. Of course, back then we didn't have cameras, and we didn't have phones to take pictures and record our precious time, and I really wish that I could have done more of those, because we have very few pictures of her, and the ones we do have suck. They're, you know, blurry, and they're just, you know, they're just not good. But anyway, he said, you know, it's time to take her back, and my husband agreed, and I think at that time he agreed only because it was an uncomfortable situation, and he couldn't deal with it. But if I could go back and hold her a little longer, I would have. And I would have told him to get out of my... It wouldn't have gone down the same way, let's put it that way. We wouldn't have had him there. We wouldn't have had him preach her funeral. But I was just devastated. You know, the days after that, and the time that followed after that, you're in a mode of survival. You're in a mode of shock. Your body just breaks, your mind and your body kind of break down, and it's just a coping. You just have to cope, and your body has to have that. It's a protection that your mind has of coping with such a horrible loss. And I can remember thinking, you know, like I said, I was kind of relieved, but of course I was sad. And then I had to go home that day. Mind you, you know, my body. I don't remember the drive home. Like I said, there was things after that I don't remember. A lot of it I don't remember because my body was in shock. I was in shock. And I can remember going home that day. And I can remember, I wish there's a lot of things I would change about that time. My husband didn't know how to properly comfort me. He was never shown that. My view of when I would get upset, he would get upset. And at the time, I thought he was angry with me. I thought he was he was mad that I was crying. So then it caused me to retreat and not feel comfortable in crying with him. Give me a moment here. And really what it was just, men are fixers, and he was uncomfortable with my crying because he didn't know how to fix it. He didn't know that he wasn't responsible for fixing it. And I wish I could have made that clear at that time to say, look, I don't need you to fix it, and I don't need you to feel uncomfortable. I just want you, you know, this was your child too. There's no shame in being grievous. That's normal. Jesus wept, you know. He knew Lazarus was going to, he knew, this is amazing to me. Jesus knew Lazarus was going to be brought forth again. He was going to call him forth out of the grave. But I think he was moved by compassion because everybody that loved Lazarus was grieving because he had died. And I think, I'm just now thinking of this, you know, I think he loved Lazarus, obviously, but I think Jesus was moved to tears because of the fact that his loved ones who had stayed in this earth were grieving him because he had died. And I'm just thinking of this. This is like the first revelation of this I've ever had this way. But I really think that Jesus was moved by the loved ones who were missing him, who were grieving the loss of their brother, their son, their whatever he was to them. And I believe Jesus was moved to compassion because he's seen how they were hurting. So Jesus wept, you know, Jesus cried. He missed him, and he was moved to compassion by those who were grieving him as well. So Anyway, we had to come home that day, and I think the hardest thing for me to have to do that day was get rid of the milk. I had frozen all my milk, and I had put it in the freezer, you know, like I said, in hopes that I would be able to come home with a healthy baby one day. But at the same time, I couldn't, you know, it had to go away. And at the time, I wish I could have took it to the hospital, but that wasn't going to happen. But thank God, like I said, we didn't have a big apartment. We didn't have a nursery. I didn't have to go home to that. And that was a good thing. If I had to go home to a nursery and baby clothes and all the reminders that told me, hey, you have a child that died and you can't use any of this stuff. But, you know, thankfully I didn't. And that was 32 years ago today that I had her. And January 19th, she was taken from us that same year. And like I said, there's no word for a parent that loses a child. You know, there's words for wives that lose husbands. We're widows. Husband that lose wife, widowers. But there's no word for a parent that loses a child. There's no term. We don't have a term, or we don't have a title. We don't have a name that's people can refer us to, a reference to, that says we've lost a child. We didn't get to keep a child. That's the thing. We didn't get to keep the child. We didn't lose it. If I had a choice, it would have never been left. She would have never been away from me. So no, I didn't lose her. I just didn't get to keep her. And the beautiful thing about this is, I could go into so much more detail here, and I don't have enough time. The beautiful thing about this is that he answered both of my prayers that night. Because I said to him, if you don't see fit to heal her, take her. But later on, I got to thinking about it. And when he took her, he healed her. The moment she left her body, the moment her spirit left her body, she was healed, 100% whole. And so, God may not answer your prayer the way you think it should be answered. And sometimes God says no. Sometimes he answers in a way that we don't think we have it all figured out. And sometimes God is silent. Most of the time he answers, but sometimes it's just not in the way that we want him to. But my consolation is, I have everything to live for on this earth, but I also have way more to live for in heaven. And I have no doubt that's where she's been, and that's where she's at, and that's where her presence is right now, along with all the other little kids and the babies and the toddlers and the children that have left this world too soon. I believe that there's a place on the Master's lap for every one of them. His lap is big enough for all of them. And I believe that's where they're at. And how fitting that the scripture that I read this morning, when I opened my Bible and read a few minutes before I started getting ready, it's the one that in Matthew, I think it was 19, that speaks on the children. And Jesus was telling, the disciples were telling him, they were trying to take the children away, and they didn't, basically, thinking that they were bothering him. And he told them, don't do that. Don't tell them that they can't come to me. And also my vernacular, I translate that loosely. His words were, suffer not the little children to come unto me, basically mean, don't tell them that they can't come and sit and approach me. And I think that's literally but I also think it's figuratively, as far as we are his children, and that we can come to him like a little child. And he says that if you don't come to me as a little child, then you're not going to be saved, because the childlike faith is what saves your soul. Children just believe because that's what they're told. Their parents tell them something is, they believe it. They have enough faith in their parents to believe that they're not going to steer them wrong, and they trust them. And thus, with our Father who is in heaven, we just have to put that much faith and trust in him as a little child to say that, he's got me. I don't have to worry because Daddy's got me. And so, to all you mamas out there who may have lost a child along the way, whether it be miscarriage, whether it be you were in a bad time of your life and you had an abortion, I am not judging you at all. Whether you've had a stillborn, whether you had like me, the baby was sick and died, or whether the baby was sick and you took it home, or wasn't sick and you took it home and the baby died of SIDS, which would be the most devastating thing ever in the whole wide world. No matter how you lost your, didn't get to keep your baby, rest assured, you got to know that where they are is they're in that place, that they are safe and secure and in a much better place than we'll ever be here on this earth, guaranteed. So if you've made it to the end of this video and you've watched me back, if you've heard me mumble and blabber, I hope you have a blessed day, and I hope you're if you have your loved ones and your children, love them, kiss them, hug them, tell them you love them. Have a blessed day.